Ma'am, we need to see your papers.
My papers? I'm Navajo. My family's been on this land for thousands of years.
That's not how immigration law works. Show us proof of citizenship or you're coming with us.
This is my ancestral homeland. You're the immigrants here.
Step back from the vehicle. You're being detained. What?
Three IC agents walked up to a Native American woman and demanded she prove she belonged in America. Her people had been on that land for thousands of years before there was an America to belong to. But none of that mattered to the agents who saw brown skin and assumed criminality. What happened that Tuesday morning outside the Shiprock trading post would become a $22.4 million lesson in the cost of ignorance, bias, and federal overreach. It was a clear Tuesday morning in Shiprock, New Mexico. Highway 491 cut through Navajo Nation land, the asphalt hot under the climbing sun. Out here, federal jurisdiction was supposed to respect tribal sovereignty. That morning, three IC agents proved they either didn't know that or didn't care. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Sage Blackwater was doing something completely ordinary when her life was turned upside down. The 38-year-old nurse practitioner had stopped at the trading post on her way home from a night shift at the Indian Health Service clinic in Shiprock. She'd picked up milk, bread, some canned goods for her grandmother, and was loading the bags into the bed of her Ford F-150 when the black SUV with government plates pulled into the parking lot. Sage didn't think much of it at first. Federal vehicles weren't uncommon in this part of the Navajo Nation. Bureau of Indian Affairs, Indian Health Service, various tribal liaisons, they all drove similar vehicles. She continued arranging her groceries, making sure nothing would roll around on the drive to her grandmother's hogan 15 miles away. But then she noticed the way the three agents approached. Not casual. Not friendly. Purposeful, with that particular kind of aggressive confidence that comes from people who believe their authority is absolute. Agent Warren Foster led the group, his body cam already recording though he hadn't yet activated it officially. Behind him were Agent Jessica Chen and Agent Raymond Burke, both younger, both clearly following Foster's lead. The footage from all three cameras would later become Exhibit A through C in a federal civil rights case that would make legal history. "Excuse me, ma'am," Foster called out, his hand already resting on his belt. "We need to speak with you." Sage looked up, squinting against the sun. "Can I help you?" Foster's eyes scanned her, taking in her long black hair pulled back in a traditional bun, her brown skin, her jeans and t-shirt. His mind had already made its calculation. "We're with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to see your identification and proof of citizenship." The words hung in the desert air like something foreign and absurd. Sage stood there for a moment, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your papers," Burke chimed in, stepping closer. "Citizenship documentation. We have reason to believe you may be in this country illegally." Sage's confusion shifted into something else. Not fear. Anger. The kind of deep, ancestral anger that comes from generations of being treated like foreigners in your own homeland. "I'm Navajo," she said slowly, deliberately. "My family has been on this land for thousands of years." Chin pulled out a tablet, checking something. "Ma'am, that's not how immigration law works. We need to see documentation proving you're a United States citizen." "You're standing on the Navajo Nation," Sage said, her voice steady but hard. "This is sovereign tribal land. You have no jurisdiction here without tribal permission." Foster's expression hardened. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he'd already decided was probably illegal. His record, which would be thoroughly examined in the lawsuit, showed a pattern of targeting indigenous people throughout the Southwest, operating under the assumption that brown skin and proximity to the border meant undocumented status. "Federal authority supersedes tribal jurisdiction in immigration matters," Foster stated, reciting something he'd been taught but didn't fully understand. "Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Show me your identification." Sage reached slowly into her truck's cab, pulling out her purse. She extracted her driver's license and held it up. "Here. New Mexico driver's license. Issued right here in Farmington." Foster barely glanced at it. "That doesn't prove citizenship. You could have that illegally. We need birth certificate, passport, or naturalization papers." "I don't carry my birth certificate with me to buy groceries," Sage said, her patience wearing thin. "I'm a registered member of the Navajo Nation. I'm a nurse practitioner. I work at the IHS clinic. I'm as American as anyone can be. More American than you, considering my ancestors have been here since time immemorial." Burke's hand moved toward his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're being uncooperative. If you can't provide proof of citizenship, We have the authority to detain you. A pickup truck pulled into the parking lot, an elderly Navajo man emerging. He saw what was happening and immediately pulled out his phone, starting to record. Within minutes, 2 more vehicles had arrived, drawn by the commotion. The Navajo community had learned long ago to watch out for each other, especially when federal agents were involved. Sage noticed the gathering witnesses and felt a small measure of relief. Whatever happened next would be documented. I'm telling you right now, you're making a serious mistake. I'm a United States citizen by birth. I'm Native American. My people were here first. Foster was done talking. Turn around. Hands behind your back. For what? Sage's voice rose. I've shown you my license. I've told you who I am. You have no probable cause to detain me. Failure to provide proof of citizenship, suspicious behavior, and now resisting a lawful detention, Foster said, grabbing her arm. Sage pulled back instinctively. Don't touch me. This isn't lawful. You're on tribal land without permission. You're violating my rights. But Foster wasn't listening. He forced her arm behind her back and Burke moved in to help. The sound of metal handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the parking lot, and the witnesses gasped. Someone shouted in Navajo words of protest and disbelief. Chin stood back, her body cam capturing everything. Later, in her deposition, she would admit she felt uncomfortable but didn't speak up because Foster was the senior agent and she was still on probation. The elderly man who'd been recording approached. You can't do this. She's dying. This is our land. You have no right. Foster turned on him. Sir, step back or you'll be arrested for interfering with federal officers. Call the tribal police, Sage shouted to the gathering crowd. Call my family. Call everyone. These agents just arrested a Native American woman on tribal land for not carrying a birth certificate to the grocery store. By now, the trading post owner, a white woman named Linda Morrison who'd run the place for 30 years, had come outside. Officers, I know Sage. She's local. She's Navajo. This is crazy. Foster ignored her, guiding Sage toward the SUV. The handcuffs were tight, already leaving marks on her wrists. The desert sun beat down, making the metal hot against her skin. You're making a mistake, Sage said, her voice clear despite the humiliation. A very expensive mistake. They loaded her into the back of the SUV, the door slamming shut with finality. Through the window she could see more people gathering, more phones out, more witnesses to what was happening. The drive to the ICE field office in Farmington took 40 minutes. 40 minutes during which Sage sat in handcuffs, her mind racing. She thought about her grandmother, who'd been born in a hogan with no electricity or running water, who'd survived boarding schools designed to erase her culture, who'd raised 7 children on this land and taught them all to be proud of who they were. She thought about her own daughter, 8 years old, who would come home from school to hear that her mother had been arrested by federal agents for being Native American in her own homeland. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had a master's degree in nursing. She'd served her community for 15 years. She paid taxes. She voted. She'd done everything right according to the standards of the country that had colonized her ancestors' land. And here she was, handcuffed in the back of a government vehicle, being treated like a criminal for having brown skin and shopping at a trading post. When they arrived at the field office, they took her to a holding room. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, a metal table and chairs bolted to the floor. Foster finally removed the handcuffs, and Sage rubbed her wrists where the skin was raw. Sit, Foster ordered. Sage remained standing. I want my lawyer. I want to contact my tribal council. And I want to know exactly what law you think I've broken. Foster slammed a folder on the table. You failed to provide proof of citizenship when asked by federal officers conducting immigration enforcement. That's enough to hold you while we verify your status. I'm enrolled in the Navajo Nation, Sage said slowly as if explaining to a child. That's a matter of public record. You could have verified it in 5 minutes instead of arresting me. But you didn't because you saw a brown woman and assumed she was illegal. Burke shifted uncomfortably. Even he was starting to realize this might not go the way Foster had planned. Your tribal enrollment doesn't automatically confer U.S. citizenship, Foster said, though he sounded less certain now. Actually it does, Sage countered. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 granted citizenship to all Native Americans born in the United States. I was born in Shiprock, New Mexico, which last I checked is still part of the United States. I'm a citizen by birth, and I'm also a member of a sovereign nation that predates your country by thousands of years. The door opened and a supervisor entered, a middle-aged woman named Sharon Gonzalez whose expression suggested she already knew this was a disaster. She'd received a call from the Navajo Nation president's office. Then another from the tribal police chief. Then another from a civil rights attorney who was already drafting a lawsuit. Foster outside. Now, Gonzalez said sharply. In the hallway, away from Sage but still captured on body cam audio, Gonzalez tore into Foster. Do you have any idea what you've done? That woman is a registered tribal member. She works for Indian Health Service. She's a decorated nurse practitioner. And you arrested her for shopping at a trading post on her own tribal land. She couldn't provide proof of citizenship, Foster protested weakly. She showed you a driver's license. She told you she was Navajo. You had no probable cause for any of this. None. And now her attorney is already filing a federal civil rights lawsuit. The tribal council is demanding an investigation, and the media is lighting up with footage of you handcuffing a Native American woman on tribal land. Inside the holding room, Sage sat calmly, though inside she was anything but calm. She was calculating. She was remembering every violation, every protocol they'd broken, every right they'd trampled. She was already building her case. When Gonzalez came back in, her tone was completely different. Ms. Blackwater, I apologize. There's been a serious misunderstanding. You're free to go. Sage stood slowly. A misunderstanding? You arrested me, handcuffed me, transported me 40 miles and held me here. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a civil rights violation. We're releasing you immediately, Gonzalez said. No charges will be filed. Of course no charges will be filed, Sage said, her voice cold. Because you have no charges. You had no probable cause. You had nothing except racial profiling and ignorance about tribal sovereignty. Outside the field office, a crowd had gathered. Tribal members, supporters, local media, all waiting. When Sage emerged, still rubbing her wrists, cameras flashed and questions erupted. She stood on the steps, the afternoon sun now lowering in the west, painting the desert in shades of amber and red. She didn't shy away. She spoke clearly, confidently, her voice carrying across the parking lot. Today, 3 IC agents arrested me on Navajo Nation land because I couldn't produce a birth certificate while buying groceries. I'm a Navajo woman. My ancestors have lived on this land since before borders existed, before immigration laws existed, before the United States existed. And I was treated like a criminal in my own homeland. This isn't just about me. This is about every Native person who's been treated like a foreigner in the land their people have inhabited for thousands of years. This is about federal agents who don't understand tribal sovereignty, who don't recognize Native citizenship, and who profile based on skin color. This ends here. The footage went viral instantly. The image of a Native American woman being arrested and asked for citizenship papers struck a nerve across the country. Indigenous rights organizations rallied. Legal scholars weighed in on the violations of tribal sovereignty. Civil rights advocates called it one of the clearest cases of racial profiling they'd ever seen. Should federal agents be required to undergo mandatory training on tribal sovereignty and indigenous rights before being allowed to operate in or near tribal lands? Comment below, because what happened to Sage Blackwater wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of federal overreach that had targeted Native communities for generations. The lawsuit was filed within a week. Sage hired a legal team that included both non-Native civil rights attorneys and Native legal advocates who specialized in tribal sovereignty issues. The complaint was devastating in its detail. Violation of Fourth Amendment rights, false arrest, false imprisonment, racial profiling, violation of tribal sovereignty, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. The defendants were the 3 agents personally, ICE as an agency, the Department of Homeland Security, and the federal government. The damages sought, $22.4 million. The discovery process was brutal for the defense. The body cam footage showed everything. Foster's immediate assumption of illegal status. The refusal to accept Sage's explanation. The violation of tribal land jurisdiction. The aggressive escalation. Burke and Chen's complicity through silence. But discovery revealed something even more damning. Foster had a history. Over his 12-year career, he'd made 47 arrests of Native Americans in or near tribal lands. Of those 47 arrests, 42 had been dismissed for lack of probable cause. He'd been counseled twice about respecting tribal sovereignty. He'd been sent to training on indigenous rights. And he'd ignored it all, continuing to target Native people based on appearance alone. The deposition of Sage Blackwater was powerful. She spoke about the historical trauma of Native people being treated as foreigners in their own land. She talked about her grandmother's experiences in boarding schools designed to erase Native identity. She explained what it felt like to be handcuffed and arrested for buying milk and bread on land her ancestors had lived on for thousands of years. My daughter asked me why the police arrested me, Sage testified, her voice steady but her pain evident. She's 8 years old. How do I explain to her that federal agents arrested her mother for being Native American? How do I tell her that in this country, even though we were here first, we're still treated like we don't belong? The legal team presented expert testimony on tribal sovereignty, on the history of federal abuse of Native communities, on the psychological impact of racial profiling. They presented evidence of Foster's pattern of targeting Native people. They showed how the arrest violated not just individual rights but tribal sovereignty itself. The defense tried to argue that Foster had acted in good faith, that he had reasonable suspicion based on Sage's inability to immediately produce citizenship documents. But the argument fell apart under scrutiny. She showed him a driver's license, Sage's attorney argued in court. She told him she was Navajo. She told him where she worked. She explained tribal sovereignty. He had every opportunity to verify her status without arrest. He chose not to because he'd already decided, based solely on her appearance, that she was illegal. That's not good faith. That's racial profiling. The case drew national attention. Native American advocacy groups filed amicus briefs. Legal scholars wrote about the implications for tribal sovereignty. Media coverage was extensive, with many outlets drawing parallels to historical injustices against Native communities. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury included 2 Native Americans, both of whom had family experiences with similar profiling. The testimony was damning. The body cam footage was played repeatedly, each viewing making the violation more obvious. Foster took the stand and tried to defend his actions. But under cross-examination he fell apart. Agent Foster, when Ms. Blackwater told you she was Navajo, what did you think that meant? That she was claiming to be Native American. Did you believe her? I needed proof. But you didn't attempt to verify her claim through any official channels before arresting her, did you? No. Why not? I believed immediate detention was necessary. Based on what probable cause? Silence. Agent Foster, answer the question. What probable cause did you have to believe Ms. Blackwater was in the country illegally? She couldn't produce citizenship documents. She produced a driver's license and explained she was a tribal member. That wasn't enough for you? I've seen fake licenses before. Did you have any reason to believe her license was fake? No, but... Did you run her license to check its validity? No. Did you contact the Navajo Nation to verify her enrollment? No. Did you contact her employer at Indian Health Service? No. Did you do anything except look at her brown skin and decide she must be illegal? The defense attorney objected, but the damage was done. Chen's testimony was particularly interesting. She admitted she'd felt the arrest was wrong but didn't speak up. I was the newest agent on the team. Foster was training me. I was taught to follow his lead. I know that's not an excuse, but it's the truth. You have body cam footage, the attorney pressed. You witnessed a violation of civil rights. Did you report it? No. Why not? I was afraid of retaliation. Afraid of being labeled a troublemaker. Afraid of losing my job. So you chose your career over protecting someone's constitutional rights? Chen's voice broke slightly. Yes. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Burke's testimony was similar, though less remorseful. He maintained that he'd been following orders, that Foster was the senior agent, that he'd assumed Foster knew what he was doing. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Liable on all counts. The damages, $22.4 million. $8 million in compensatory damages to Sage Blackwater. $14.4 million in punitive damages, specifically designed to send a message that this behavior would not be tolerated. The jury foreman, a retired teacher who was himself Pueblo, spoke after the verdict. We wanted to make sure the government understood that Native people aren't foreigners. We've been here since before there was a United States. We're citizens, we're sovereign nations, and we deserve to be treated with respect. This verdict is for every Native person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong in their own homeland. The reaction was seismic. Native communities across the country celebrated. Indigenous rights organizations held it up as a landmark victory. Legal experts called it one of the most significant tribal sovereignty cases in decades. Foster was fired and barred from federal law enforcement. Burke was suspended for 2 years without pay. Chen received probation and mandatory retraining, her cooperation with the investigation earning her some leniency. But the impact went far beyond individual accountability. The case triggered systemic reforms. ICE implemented mandatory training on tribal sovereignty for all agents. New protocols were established requiring verification through tribal enrollment offices before any arrest on or near tribal lands. Oversight mechanisms were created to track patterns of targeting Native communities. The Navajo Nation used the case to push for greater jurisdictional clarity, working with other tribes to establish stronger protections against federal overreach. Legislation was introduced in Congress to strengthen tribal sovereignty protections and create specific penalties for federal agents who violated them. Sage Blackwater became an unexpected advocate. She spoke at tribal councils, at universities, at legal conferences. She talked about what happened to her, but more importantly, she talked about the broader context of Native people being treated as perpetual foreigners despite being the original inhabitants of this land. She used a portion of the settlement to establish a legal defense fund for Native people facing similar violations. She funded scholarships for Native students pursuing law degrees, hoping to build a new generation of legal advocates who understood tribal sovereignty from lived experience. Her daughter, now understanding more about what happened, wrote a school essay about her mother's courage. About how standing up to injustice, even when it's scary, is important. About how their ancestors had survived colonization, boarding schools, forced removal, and cultural erasure, and they'd survived this too. Sage's grandmother, who'd watched the news coverage with tears streaming down her weathered face, said something that stayed with Sage. They tried to make you prove you belong on land where our people have always belonged. But you proved something else. You proved they can't break us. They never could. The trading post where it happened put up a historical marker. Not to commemorate the arrest, but to commemorate the resistance. To remind people that in this place, a Navajo woman had stood up for her rights, for her people's sovereignty, for the truth that indigenous people aren't immigrants in their own homeland. Years later, Sage still shops at that trading post. She still loads groceries into her truck in that same parking lot. But now, when federal vehicles pull in, the agents nod respectfully. Some have even approached her to apologize, to say they've been through the new training, to promise they understand better now. She accepts their apologies but doesn't let them forget. The training is good, she tells them. But understanding has to go deeper than a PowerPoint presentation. You need to understand that when you see Native people, you're seeing people whose families have been here since time began. We're not the immigrants. We never were. And treating us like we don't belong is a violence that echoes through generations. The case is taught in law schools now, studied by students learning about civil rights, tribal sovereignty, and federal accountability. The body cam footage is used in training sessions across law enforcement agencies as an example of what not to do, of how implicit bias and ignorance of Native rights can lead to catastrophic violations. The $22.4 million settlement remains one of the largest ever awarded in a tribal sovereignty civil rights case. But for Sage and her community, the number was never the point. The point was recognition. Accountability. A public acknowledgement that what happened was wrong, illegal, and rooted in a racism that sees brown skin and assumes illegality, even when that brown skin belongs to people who've inhabited this land since before borders existed. The red rocks outside Shiprock still stand, ancient and unmoved. They watched as colonizers arrived and claimed the land as their own. They watched as Native people were pushed onto reservations. They watched as generations struggled to maintain their identity, their sovereignty, their right to exist on their own terms. And on that bright Tuesday morning, they watched as 3 federal agents made a choice that would cost them everything, because they couldn't see past their biases long enough to recognize that the woman they were arresting had more claim to this land than any immigration law could ever acknowledge. Sometimes justice takes the form of money. Sometimes it takes the form of policy change. Sometimes it takes the form of legal precedent. But always, it takes the form of truth being acknowledged, of wrongs being named, and of systems being forced to confront the harm they've caused. Sage Blackwater got all 3. And in getting them, she opened a door for every Native person who'd ever been told they didn't belong, to walk through and say, "We were here first. We're still here. And you can't make us prove our right to exist in our own homeland anymore. If you believe that indigenous sovereignty matters, that racial profiling must end, and that knowing history is essential to achieving justice, subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we're bringing another story that proves the arc of justice is long, but when people refuse to accept injustice, it bends faster than anyone expects.